Hello everyone and welcome back to CryptoLiveLeak. My name is Ken Garofalo and we are here live at Futurist 19 here in Toronto, Canada, and we have the pleasure to speak with Ammar Naseer, the community outreach contributor of Decred. How are you doing today, Ammar?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, you're so welcome. We are definitely interested in learning a lot about Decred today, so let's get right into it. So first, let's get a little bit of background on yourself, why you got into cryptocurrency and why Decred.
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a traditional financial background. I actually work for a bank in my day job, believe it or not. I've worked in traditional finance, sort of tech and finance background. That's kind of what attracted me towards crypto as a whole as well. When you see sort of thematically the trends of how the world financial system is going, as well as sort of you see the need for decentralized entities and how, as we spend more and more money digitally, are there privacy concerns of that? Are there people who are middlemen who are taking sort of rent, if you will call it, whether in their data, whether in fees? So that's sort of my intro to crypto. I first got into Bitcoin, like a lot of us do. Spent a lot of time in it. Actually got wrecked. I bought Bitcoin at the top. I'm sure a lot of us actually got wrecked, so I'm still recovering from that. But then when I started thinking more and more and spending more and more time thinking about it, there's a couple of questions that I had that were still unanswered. Things like, so who makes decisions? How come as a token holder of Bitcoin we have no say? I mean, I'm sure we could go on Twitter and we could talk about it, but we really have no say. There's pros and cons about that. People debate that. There's also another question around, so who really funds this development? Blockstream and others fund it right now. So who's going to fund Bitcoin development, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? 30 years from now? Are people going to be donating money continually? Is that really the best mechanism? Or are there other token design mechanisms that could be used for a continuous development of the ecosystem? And that's what kind of got me into Decred. There's a couple of really, really smart people like Chris Berniski from Placeholder Ventures and others who are really talking about Decred, so I got into it. Yeah, really, so it's really the governance of Decred, the long-term funding mechanism, its ability to respond to changes, not just for now, but really the long-term play. That's what differentiates Decred. For those that don't know Decred, Decred is a hyper-secure cryptocurrency, much like Bitcoin in the sense that it's scarce, it's got a 21 million supply cap, but it differentiates itself from Bitcoin in some key ways that I believe long-term will really prove out with the value proposition.
Okay, excellent. And we'll get into consensus funding and governance in just a second. But before that, let's talk a little bit about the team structure of Decred. Being a little bit decentralized, I know it can be hard to build a certain team that gives leadership qualities. So how is that structure set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a truly distributed team. It's worldwide. It's not owned by any one particular company. It's Company Zero was sort of the company that they were initially the contributors towards Bitcoin. They actually did a lot of the work actually that is used for Lightning Network today. So believe it or not, when we talk about Lightning Network coming to Bitcoin, it actually is already compatible with Decred today. So some of the really key smart technical players from Company Zero were the initial sort of workers towards Decred, but as the community tends to grow, the way Decred is structured is that anybody could become a contributor to it. I myself, I'm in Toronto, Canada. I've recently become sort of an active participant and contributor towards Decred. If anybody's listening, join us on Twitter. You become an active contributor. It's a very inclusive and accessible community. Whether you're a really technical person or a non-technical person, you come from a financial background, non-financial background, anywhere in the world, Decred is very welcoming.
Talk about meetups, right? Do you have local meetups here in Toronto or across the globe?
We do actually. So if you sort of just look up Decred Canada, in Canada and Toronto, we've been increasingly trying to create more and more of sort of a vibe around meetups. It's so great that because of the fact that the quality of the code, the quality of the people with this project is so great. It's got the right ethics. Even when we came to this conference, people automatically just reached out to us and saying, "Hey, we know about Decred. How do we get involved with you guys? Can we join you guys?" So we've had a lot of, call it maximalists, actually reach out to us and say, "Hey, you know what? Decred seems like it's doing the right thing." So anybody could really become a contributor or a community member. Join us on Twitter. That's where a lot of the conversation happens. And really, it's borderless. There's Decred Africa, Decred Brazil, Decred India, Decred Canada. So it's really globally available. And if Decred is not sort of having a community in your country, then you know what? You can start one. That's the beauty of it.
Well, hopefully soon we get a Decred Boston. I mean, that's where we're based, and we'd love to work with you guys. So let's get into a little more of the details of what Decred actually is. We'll start with the consensus mechanism. I know it's a bit of a hybrid system, as you mentioned earlier, so let's go into those details.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of the currencies today that you see are actually pure proof of work currencies. Decred actually iterates on that in the sense that it combines proof of work and proof of stake. So what that does is that actually gives it actually makes the network more secure. So there's been some research that actually show that on an apples to apples basis, Decred can be more secure than even Bitcoin, believe it or not. And Bitcoin is by far the most secure network today. And Decred is it still has a smaller market cap. It's only 300 million or so today. But as the network starts to grow more and more, you'll see and hear more about sort of the security of Decred. The other thing that it also does, it actually provides a separation of powers and checks and balances. So in a pure proof of work sort of design, miners tend to have all sort of like the power, if you will, because they're sort of mining. By splitting up sort of the proof of work or combining it with proof of stake, you actually give stakeholders a power as well. So people who are actually who've invested in the hardware for mining, plus people who are actually holding the token itself. So that's sort of really the the feng shui, the yin and the yang. To me, that's really that was one of the differentiators of this.
Yeah. And I'm really glad to see that you guys are in the top 30 cryptos now. That's pretty big news.
It is.
So talk about the funding. How do you guys maintain funding to have the long-term vision that you seem to outline here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that the market hasn't fully realized yet as a differentiator. You're going to hear about it more and more. I mean, we hear about cryptocurrencies who raised a lot of money through ICOs, but then they ran out of money. You hear about companies which have great ideas, but then there's no mechanism to fund them. They ran out of the runway. One of the sort of the biggest foresights that the people of the initiators of Decred had was this ability to say that, as each new Decred is mined, the way the token structure is designed in such a manner that 60% of the reward goes to the miners, 30% goes to people who have dedicated to stake their Decred, meaning they're long-term holders of Decred, and 10% of the value actually goes into this treasury fund. So it's almost a fund that continues to grow over time. And today the value of the fund is just around 20 million or so. But you can think about the fact that, as more and more Decred gets mined, and as the value of Decred keeps increasing, to me, this is one of the most underrated things, that Decred doesn't ever have to rely on external parties. We don't have to rely on people who may end up with sort of their own personal returns. The decisions can be made in a manner that can sort of look out for the results or look out for the viewpoints of the overall Decred community. And long term, that value will really play out.
So talking about those decisions that can be made for the overall good of the community, what is the governance mechanism that allows these decisions to be made in a decentralized manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So governance is sort of, it's a really big topic, and it's, we had a panel here as well, and actually, believe it or not, the panel was, even though it had nothing to do with Decred, there's a lot of other people that were giving shout-outs to Decred, so that was really interesting to see. But specifically when you talk about governance, there's off-chain governance, and then there's on-chain governance. So Decred has a mechanism where anybody can participate in the governance if you have skin in the game. What that means is there's this thing called politeia. It's a mechanism where if you have an idea where you think you could contribute towards the betterment of the overall Decred community, you can post it on Politeia, and Decred holders will actually get to vote on it. And we've had people who are technical people as well as people who are non-technical people who are marketing firms, people who are coming from PR backgrounds and actually saying, you know what, this thing is so smart, it's got such great underrated value. They've submitted proposals and people vote on it, and if enough people vote on it, then the idea gets approved. So that's sort of the off-chain component. The on-chain component is more held around sort of the technical upgrades that tends to do so.
Okay. So just clarify me again. So people that are submitting these proposals, do they have to be, say, staking in the network to be able to submit, or it could be anyone?
Could be anyone. So you need, currently it's about 0.1 DCR is what you need. That's subject to change in the future. So essentially that fee, that 0.1 DCR is only needed so that people don't spam the network with bad ideas. So you have to have a small sort of structure that disincentivizes spam. So that's why that's sort of really smart. And that fee is actually subject to change long term. So if the fee, if the actual value of Decred goes, moon long term, right? Shout out to Moon. that fee could be changed or re-looked at. So essentially, but we need to have a mechanism that we can disincentivize spam while incentivizing the best ideas to put their foot forward, and create a mechanism that the overall community can vote on a way that can govern and sort of really improve the network long term.
Okay, excellent. So we talked a little bit about atomic swaps and a DEX that's built on Decred and Decred utilizes. So let's get a little explanation on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Decred is capable of supporting atomic swaps. Essentially, one of the key, most exciting things that's in the pipeline for Decred in the roadmap is the idea of a decentralized exchange. So currently, if you have sort of tokens, you have to rely on sort of middlemen to try to exchange your tokens into other sort of tokens, on ramps or off ramps. Decred is working in such a manner that you'll be able to support or exchange your tokens directly to other tokens in a decentralized manner without sort of losing custody, without paying exponential fees, without relying on people who will potentially take custody of your tokens. So that's really smart. So atomic swaps, Lightning Network, a decentralized exchange. There's some really good short-term things that are in the pipeline for Decred. Privacy is one of the other things that's talked about a lot in terms of sort of the crypto space. So scalability is one of the other things that's talked about. So there's market makers. We're talking about volatility or liquidity. So there's so many great ideas at the same time converging and into Decred that it's such a great time for the community. And I feel personally, coming from a traditional finance background, we always try to look for what we call, and you come from a traditional background as well, so what we call seeking alpha, where you try to say, what are there asymmetrical pieces of advantage? And to me, if you want to seek alpha, if you want to seek returns in crypto, to me there's almost nothing better than Decred in this space right now.
Well, that's cool that you let us in on some of the insights of what's coming in the future here, privacy, Lightning Network, scalability, solutions. But let's talk about the coin a little bit here. So you got about 21 million in circulating, or not circulating supply, total supply, right? You're listed on a bunch of exchanges, main exchanges. You're doing about 3 million in daily volume, right? So is there any, who's the foundation? Is it the money that's stored in that treasury account that is used for exchange listings, or how are you guys getting on other exchanges?
Yeah, so there's let's talk into a couple of those things. The 21 million supply is really sort of the sound money property, right? The scarcity of it. That's partially what makes Bitcoin, or in large part, from an economic point of view, that makes Bitcoin so important and so valuable is the scarcity, the ability for it to be sort of not inflated away over time. The same property applies to Decred as well. With regards to the liquidity of it, one of the things with Decred is over 50% of all Decred is actually staked away or locked away. So what that means is really people who are buying Decred are actually saying, in large part, that half of them are actually literally physically saying explicitly, this is a store of value. I'm good with actually locking this away for at least 28 days at the minimum, if not more. And in exchange for that, they actually get a dividend return. They actually get voting power of their network. So that's sort of the store of value thesis for Decred. We're doing about 3 million on daily sort of volume so far. It's listed on Binance. It's listed on Bittrex. It's listed on an increasing number of exchanges. Coinbase actually came out with sort of an announcement recently on sort of key assets that they're about to list, and Decred was one of them. So in terms of the treasury, to your question, is sort of used more to fund the ecosystem. So think of it almost like if there was a savings account almost, which is used to fund your day-to-day sort of balances, your day-to-day lifestyle. That treasury is used to fund sort of the overall ecosystem. The exchange volume is more around people on a day-to-day basis buying and selling Decred.
Okay, excellent. So being from the traditional finance background, we love dividends, we love annuities, we love bonds, right? So proof of stake relates to that. So what's the return someone can expect on an annual basis for staking their Decred?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, when you look at sort of the properties of money, the way people traditionally look at assets, they're like stores of value, they're mediums of exchange, or there are these appreciating assets, right? So you look at why people buy homes and rent out homes. It's because they pay cash flow. There's a lot of institutional investors that will only invest in assets that will have some sort of return. So stocks traditionally, if they pay like 5%, that's considered pretty good. Bonds, right now, increasingly they're paying smaller and smaller smaller number because there's a sort of turbulence in global markets. But Decred actually, believe it or not, pays 10%, which is really, really high. That number will go down over time, but that's sort of one of the best ways from a design perspective is that that's meant to incentivize sort of early adoption, and Decred is fairly new. So only 50% of Decred has only been mined. Compare that to about 80% of Bitcoin that's already been mined. So Decred is fairly new, and to me, that's one of the sort of the value proposition of Decred is, as the world is waking up to cryptocurrencies, you want them to be able to have a chance to say, you know what, people should be able to still own a full Decred. People should be able to still own a full Bitcoin if they wanted to. So the full Decred will continue to be mined until shortly after 2039, and that it sort of tails off over time. And there's a chart of this available at decred.org. But really, to your question about dividends and staking returns, Decred is giving about 10%, which is on top of an appreciating asset of DCR. So your asset appreciates, plus you get dividends, which are denominated in the asset. So that's almost double appreciation.
And the profit incentives are aligned here. Unlike Bitcoin mining, people have to put a lot of money into the computer hardware, the ASICs. In a proof of stake system like Decred has, you just have to buy more asset of the DCR, right? In order to gain more power to gain interest on, right? Which is the validating power for the network. So where can people go, Ammar, to find more information on Decred? I know you mentioned decred.org. Is that the only source where you can find more information? Give us some website links here.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of so first of all, decred.org is actually the official website. It is one of the things that attracted me to it was actually sort of how clean it is. So I'm not a developer, right? So I mean, one of the things that we find in this space is that it tends to be so heavy on the dev side, which is really important in the beginning days, but that can turn off some of the people. So with Decred, actually, the cleanliness of their website, the cleanliness of their wallet, they have a wallet called Decredit. If you guys can download it, just take a look at how easy it is. The user experience, the design of it is meant to speak not only to a technical audience, but also an audience who comes from a financial background, who comes from a non-technical background, and anybody who is really sort of looking to get involved with the space. So decred.org, check that out. But also check out Twitter. So hashtag Decred or DCR is the token. When you look it up, there's an increasing number of spaces. There's also a couple of great Medium posts that have been written on sort of how Decred is so secure, how Decred is sort of built to last for so long, and how it aligns to your point about incentives between different groups of stakeholders. They're really cool. Check it out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ammar. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care.
Cheers.